What up folks, TripTCG here, and with Phyrexia All vs 1 just a little bit around the corner, we've just started getting spoilers, and then Explorer Anthology 2 now set out in the past, I thought now would be a good time to talk about another set kind of on the horizon coming to Arena later this year, projected around mid-2023 roughly, Shadows Over Innistrad Remastered. I've banged on and talked a lot about the different cards still missing from the Explorer format that haven't been brought over Pioneer, and hopefully we should get a ton of them here, and this is basically my wish list. I'm going to go through about 20 cards that I think kind of, I would be massively let down, honestly, if they're not in the set. Before I get into it, if you're interested in Explorer content, please do hit that subscribe button. I try and cover as many decks as possible in the format, as well as kind of like informative videos like this one. Going through in alphabetical order, starting with A, and with Archangel Allison. Standard All-Star, 5 mana, flash, 4/4, flying threat, ETB creature you control indestructible end of the turn. When a non-angel creature you control dies, transform at the beginning of your next upkeep, and then obviously the other half. When this creature transforms into Allison the Purifier, it does 3 damage to each other creature and each opponent, and is a 6/5 absolute beatstick in the air. Allison's a card that's not seen tons and tons of Pioneer play, but has shown up recently, either in White Yorion lists, in Blue-White Flash and Flash-type lists, which is roughly where it saw play when it was back in Standard as well. A versatile flying threat, an interesting sideboard card potentially out of decks like U-White 2, and so, hey, thought it's a good one to start things off with. We have Bedlam Reveler, a card that was seen play in Modern actually before Pioneer was even a format, let alone Explorer. Card advantage for decks that don't generally have card advantage, whether that be in like red-black, red-white, Mardu, like the Mardu Pyromancer deck that it crops up in Modern, or something like Mono Red Price, where you have like a bunch of burn, a bunch of really cheap efficient creatures, and then you have this as a way to like, okay, I'm going to make a big threat, draw 3 after I've emptied my hand, and it's really, really strong. It's not seen tons and tons of play in Pioneer, but it's an important piece to have around, I think, and it does enable some certain strategies. Next up, we have Behold the Beyond. Bringing up this card, and one that people thought was destined to just be a commander thing, and be like a 50p mythic for the end of time. Fortunately, a little card called Lotus Field came along, and now it sees play in the Lotus Field deck in Pioneer, and hopefully soon in Explorer as well. Basically, the deck's trying to cast Sultai Ultimatum, and this is one of the things you find off of it, and then obviously does the discard your hand, search your library for 3 cards, puts it into your hand, lets you kind of carry on going, as it were. Excellent card in that deck, but not really one that's going to crop up anywhere else. Moving forward, we have Bruna the Fading Light. 7 mana Angel. When you cast it, return target angel or human creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then it melds, well, it has Flying and Vigilance and is a 5/7, so chunky angel, but melds with Gazelle the Broken Blade, which we also have up next. So 4 mana, 4/3, flying first right lifelinker, mini Baneslayer Angel, it was often called. And these meld together to create Brizella, Voice of Nightmares. Pretty cool, pretty cool. 9/10, flying first right Vigilance lifelink. Lots of abilities, and your opponents can't cast spells or command mana cost 3 or less. They've not seen a ton of play in Pioneer, but it's a pretty cool thing to have flying around in the format, and they are useful cards on their own, either like, again, reanimating humans or angels here. We do have Lyra, we do have Baneslayer themselves, but hey, the combination of these might grow up somewhere, and it's pretty fun. The other thing is that, while a lot of the meld cards are quite difficult to pull off, because Bruna brings back the Gazella, it synergizes really, really nicely together, and so flipping it is very, very realistic. On into C, we have Collective Brutality, and I've included 2 collective cards on this list. Collective Brutality is one that's seen a ton of play in older formats. It has 3 very, very relevant abilities, and sometimes you'll be activating all 3 of them. If your opponent reveals their hand, you choose an instant sorcery card from it, they discard it. Each gets -2/-2, or opponent loses 2 life, gain 2 life, escalates to discard a card, so 2 mana to do all the modes, and sometimes those cards you discard, you actually want them in the graveyard. Things like Greasefang, things like Dredge, those kind of decks where you're like, I have these cards in my hand that I do not want there, I would like them in the graveyard, please. But then there's something like Burn, you're getting to like kill their Eidolon, take a burn spell out of their hand, and also drain them for 2. And often you'll find that you've got a couple of cards in your hand, and you're like, yeah, I'd rather do those. And so Collective Brutality is one that's cropped up quite a lot, I think. Really nice to have around. Collective Defiance is another interesting one. So, Collective Defiance primarily seen a bit of a rise in play in Explorer, and that is, sorry, in Pioneer, and that is due to this wheel ability. Target player discards all the cards on her hand, then draws that many cards. Either in conjunction with Narset or now we also do have Shieldred floating around. You can do some pretty nice things there in blue-red or in red-black. Though, hey, Collector's Defiance, like, the wheel is nice, but, like, it's not like a draw 7 like Days Undoing. And then the other modes are, like, fine. It's 3 mana, plus 1 for the Escalate, but 4 damage to a creature, kind of inefficient, and then 3 damage to target opponent, not very efficient. But largely you're playing it if you're like, it's a removal spell that also has this wheel effect if you are doing like Narset things, which is super nice to have. Krypto Sprite is another one that's not seen a ton of play in Pioneer itself, but has a lot of potential. You'll probably hear me use that word a lot in this video. Decks where things like Sacrifice, Green Black Sacrifice in particular, is where this has cropped up before in like the past, whether that be in Standards or in kind of like Aristocrat style decks, where you can give these creatures you have kind of laying around with the ones that like recur when they die, or even like your sacrifice effects potentially, or drainers like Zulaport Cutthroat, giving them the ability to have mana, just let you kind of go to town. And so Krypto Sprite is a pretty powerful card in that way. Our first emerge card on the list is Decimator of the Provinces. 10 mana, emerge for 9. When you cast it, creatures you control get +2/+2 and trample turn a turn. Trample and haste itself. It's a great hit Behemoth style effect, and the emerge ability means you can play it for a bit cheaper, whether that be in something like Elves or some other kind of green ramp deck. Decimate is a really nice one to have in the format. We'll see how much it crops up. Another one on the list, and so I'm a big fan of the emerge cards, but they obviously have clear downsides. I mean, it's on the face of it an 8 mana card, but I'm hoping that there are some shells where you can maybe take advantage of some of these and do some pretty crazy things, because the effects are very powerful. It emerges for 5 black. If you're not familiar with the emerge mechanic, which I should explain for Decimate of the Provinces, you cast it by sacrificing a creature and paying the emerge cost reduced by its mana cost. So for Descendant Mindbinder, the emerge cost is 5 black. If you sacrifice a 3-drop, you just have to play 2 black to cast it, and then you get a 5/5. And when you cast it, and again, these are all cast triggers, these are Eldrazi cards, target opponent reveals his or her hand. You can choose a card from it, a non-land card from it with converted mana cost 3 or less, and a card with converted mana cost 4 or greater, and they discard both of them. So that was pretty powerful. The Decimator we saw gives all your creatures +2/+2 and trample. And there are more on the list. Duskwatch Recruiter here in green is again like a bit of an under the radar card. 2 mana 2/2. It is a human, it is a werewolf, it is a warrior, which are sometimes relevant creature types. But the real upside here is that you've got this mana sink ability. 3 mana, look at the top 3 cards of your library, reveal a creature card from among them, put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library. We've seen with Recruitment Officer how good that is in mono white, though to an extent they just need another 2/1. But having this kind of ability for decks that want to play like Collector Company, where you just be able to get some extra form of card advantage. Admittedly, I've not included the flip side of it here, but it's a 3/3, and creature spells cost 1 less to cast, which is pretty nice as well. Pretty nice overall. Maybe there's some places where it can crop up. Yes, the other Eldrazi I mentioned, Elder Deep Fiend, Elder Deep Fried, if you like. Again, 8 mana, emerges 5 blue, but has flash. And then when you cast it, tap up to 4 target permanents. Whether this is some kind of Time Walk effect, you can do it on your opponent's upkeep, just tap all their lands. You can do it in combat. That tends to be where these cards are the most potentially devastating. You get to flash it in, tap their lands so they can't use them, and then also ambush their creatures with this 5/6 body. Yeah, pretty good. Again, it hasn't found like a solid home in Pioneer, but there's like potential for some kinds of shenanigans, whether that be in Bant, whether that be in some other kind of shell. Even blue-black with Mindbender, I think there's a lot of potential, and you can kind of build around it a bit, and there are some good creatures to sacrifice that we have in the format at the minute. Next up, Eldritch Evolution, another green card. 1 green, as additional cost to cast it, sacrifice a creature, search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less, where X is 2, plus the sacrifice creature's converted mana cost, and you get to put it onto the battlefield. We've seen how good Enigmatic Incarnation is, and obviously Eldritch Evolution isn't repeatable, it's once, and it does exile itself. The place where it's seeing the most play at the moment is actually in Abzan Greasefang, and that's because you can sacrifice one of your early creatures, whether that be Stitcher Supplier or a Fiend's Informant, to go and get the Greasefang itself. Does a great job of tutoring for it on curve as well. Pretty nice. Turns your enablers into an actual Greasefang, and has a bunch of other applications as well in the format. You can do things with Vanifar, I've seen it in those kind of lists as well. Obviously we don't have Quarter Calling yet. That's just another creature tutor, and hey, love to see it. Emrakul the Promised End. I said it was the last Eldrazi, it wasn't, it was just the last emerge one. Emrakul the Promised End, 13 mana, one less to cast for each card type among cards in your graveyard. When you cast Emrakul, you gain control of target opponent during that player's next turn. After that turn, that player takes an extra turn. Flying, trample, protection from instants. So Emrakul's a pretty powerful one. We've obviously seen a bunch of Delirium things. Honestly, in Pioneer, Delirium's kind of fallen to the wayside a bit. Early on, we saw some Delirium decks that might be playing like Traverse and an Emrakul to go grab. We've seen it come up in some sideboards as well. It is a super powerful effect. The whole like Mindslaver, take your opponent's turn, just use all their cards is obviously nuts. One of my pet decks in the format is Aetherworks Marvel, and Emrakul is just another huge hit there. A really, really nice thing to have floating around in the format, allowing some Delirium strategies along with some other cards that you'll see on this list. Obviously a mechanic that we've not really got in Explorer at the moment. Engulf the Shore's a bit of a fun one. Return to their hands all creatures with toughness less than or equal to the number of islands you control. This enables like a very specific kind of deck. Because it's an instant as well, and most of these kinds of effects tend to be sorceries, it lets you play like a tap-out island-based like mono-blue style control deck, and still have good answers to your opponent's creatures. That's generally where the mono-blue control decks tend to fail, is that, hey, their removal just isn't that great. If anything kind of gets through the counterspell wall, you're kind of screwed. It could also enable, like, with this being there to kind of fill that gap in the middle of the curve, you might even see something like a turns that come around, and that, I think, would be pretty cool to have in the format, even if it's not the funnest thing to be on the receiving end of. Are At Your Sanitarium, again, like not like a super obvious card, but one that has cropped up quite a bit in conjunction with Narset to be like the one-sided draw when you activate on your opponent's turn. Obviously, Narset stops your opponent drawing more than one card a turn. Hey, on their turn, why not? You get to draw a card, but then your opponent just has to discard. Obviously, you do still have to discard yourself, but hey, you get to just take a card out of your opponent's hand. Nice thing to have in the toolbox. Would just like to have it, please, Watsy. Please. Grimflayer, another one of these kind of like green-black Delirium cards that we're going to see a few more of, along with Emrakul, kind of like enabler for that kind of archetype. We have a lot of good like 2-mana cards to play in green-black, I think, and the deck's not all that powerful. Despite having like Thoughtseize, Fatal Push, a bunch of really, really nice spells, the creature a little lackluster, especially without the fetch lands that we have in older formats like Modern. Glimfire is a nice 2-drop. When it does combat damage to the player, look at the top 3 cards of your library. Any number of them into the graveyard, best rest back on top in any order, and then +2/+2 as long as there are 4 or more card types in your graveyard. Backed up by removal with Thoughtseize and Fatal Push, you can get some good value out of Grimflayer, but it's kind of struggling a little bit, being underpowered. Green-black's not like a staple deck in Pioneer right now. It has been at some points in the past, but the way the format's played out, it's outdone by red-black and all the cards they've got there. Things like Fable, the Mirror Breaker, that are just incredible cards, Croxer. And hey, maybe you get some kind of jump build. But yeah, Grimflayer is a really nice thing to have in the format. Would like it, please. Next up, Grispoon. This one's like fairly straightforward. Sees play in roughly one deck, and that is green-white auras. Still auras in Explorer. We do not have the hexproof cards. Maybe later down the line, whether we get an Explorer Anthology 3 or something else. Oh, Handware Battlements is a personal favourite of mine. Not because I want to go meld things with it. In fact, I've not even included Handware Garrison on this list, but Handware Battlements is a land that enables you to give creatures haste. Obviously, there are ways to tutor for lands. There are some pretty big creatures that we'd like to be able to give haste. And so, yeah, here it is. It's on my list. Next up, the first Planeswalker, I think. Liliana, the Last Hope. It might be the only Planeswalker now I think about it. We have a Liliana in the format, but this one does some things the other one doesn't. The first thing is that obviously it can snipe X1s, whether that be from spirits, humans, those kind of decks. The -2 is kind of where the card gets the most value, I think. You play it in like a creature deck, whether that be red-black, black-green, and you get to put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard and then return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. There are a lot of good choices in the 3-drop slot in any of these kind of Black X range decks. Or in Greasefang itself, obviously Liliana the Veil does plus and you get to use the discard. There is a place for Liliana Last Hope, I think. It has a super, super powerful game-ending ultimate versus some of these slower mid-range or control decks. This ability to recycle your creatures in a kind of mid-range shell versus control make it pretty good. Nahiri, one of my most played cards on this list, I think. Probably not the most played, but I spent at least a season and a half, maybe multiple seasons of modern PPTQs playing Jeskai Nahiri. 4 mana, starts on 4, takes up to 6 straight away, discard a card if you do draw a card. -2 ability, exile target enchantment, tapped artifact, or tapped creature. You might be like, oh, that's a little bit like Wandering Emperor. Obviously, Wandering Emperor is nuts. Nahiri's decent. This -8 ability is kind of the icing on the cake. The reason you maybe would choose to play Nahiri is search your library for an artifact or creature card, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. It gains haste, returns to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. And so, traditionally, like in Modern, you use Nahiri to grab Emrakul the Aeon's Torn, get that Annihilator -6 going. You've seen it in Standard, grab things like Linvala, but it's a really, really nice card. It gets to like tick up very, very quickly. It's hard to deal with while it's in play. It interacts well with your opponent's creatures. Being able to tutor for things, especially with the Brothers War Cup that's just come out, there are some pretty nice things that you can go and grab. Even if it's just, or even just like a Torrential Gearhulk in a kind of just like control shell. I don't think it's making like huge waves, but it's a really cool card to have in the format and would maybe bring some new decks to the forefront, which would be cool. Pieces of the Puzzle. Pieces of the Puzzle. Pretty interesting card. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library, put up to 2 instant or sorcery cards from among them into your hand, and the rest into your graveyard. And you might be thinking, especially if you're predominantly an Explorer player, like, why would this be that great? But the real power of it comes when you're using Delve spells like Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time, and you can use it to power them out while also finding you important instants or sorceries. It's a card that's seen a bunch of play in Izzet Phoenix in Pioneer, but we don't have those, like, big Delve payoffs, those or Temporal Trespass, that this kind of enables, because obviously in Phoenix, you want to put the Phoenix in the graveyard anyway, and then getting to find 2 instant sorceries to then go and trigger the Phoenixes is super, super important. Nice card to have around the format, but will be better when, if eventually we get those Delve spells. Pour over pages. 3 blue, draw 3 cards, untap up to 2 lands, then discard a card. Purely for Lotus Field. We still don't have Hidden Strings. This would give you another effect that untaps your lands. Admittedly, a much more expensive one. I would like Lotus Field to become more of a deck in Explorer. Just to kind of make the formats closer together. It's one of the main things that Explorer does not have in it. Most of the other Pioneer decks are represented in some form, but Lotus Field isn't, or at least the Lotus Field decks we have in Explorer are vastly, vastly different, trying to play like discontinuity. Enough said here. Next up, okay. There are tons of cards, like, Shadows Over Innistrad was the time where I was playing tons and tons of Magic. Prize Amalgam's, again, another like favorite of mine. I've been playing Dredge. I've tried to play Dredge in Pioneer, actually, recently. You get hit by some cross-hate from Greasefang. There is a lot of graveyard hate floating around. Prize Amalgam basically makes an entire new deck in Explorer by itself in creating Dredge. It's the most powerful card in the deck, just being able to come back all the time, and so you can, and I have made videos on Dredge in Explorer that you can check out, and the deck is alright. It does things very, very quickly, but with Prize Amalgam, it would make it, like, good. Really, really good. Especially in Best of One, where people aren't going to have access to that sideboard graveyard hate. Hey, if you want to, like, find a quick way to climb the ranks in Explorer, in Best of One, Dredge is going to be an insane choice for that. The deck is very, very quickly. People aren't expecting it. They are not prepared. Prize Amalgam's kind of the key piece to that. Either with Narc Amoeba, Haunted Dead, the Ghoul that comes back when you gain life. There's so many good tools. If you're interested in Dredge in Pioneer or Explorer, I've got videos on those, and the deck is pretty wild. Alright, Seasons Past is kind of a fun one. We have seen different things with Seasons Past over the years, whether it be in like sideboards or as like a strategy in the main deck. It's too slow, really, to be doing as your like main thing in Explorer and Pioneer, but as like a sideboard strategy versus mid-range control decks, where you're kind of duking it out, setting in top deck wars, it just picks up so many cards. There's a spot for it, I think. Selfless Spirit, again, a card I've played a ton of. Very, very straightforward. It's a 2-mana, 2/1 flying spirit, but you can sacrifice it, and creatures you control gain indestructible at the end of the turn. It's an incredibly powerful effect in Spirits. It's a good effect out of the sideboard out of various other types of white aggro. In particular, in Spirits, being able to protect your spell Quellers, spoiler alert, that's coming up in a minute, but also versus cards like Bonecrusher Giant, which are just absolutely pillars of the Explorer format and Pioneer format. It's another 2-drop where they don't get the tempo swing of being able to go, I'm going to Bonecrusher your guy, and then I'm going to untap make the Bonecrusher Giant. Obviously, it does deny that. It's seen playing decks like Blue White Flash, where you just try and play only creatures that are kind of good versus Bonecrusher Giant, or where it's not really making a massive swing. But obviously, the main thing is that it's got this effect that protects your creatures from wrath effects and removal, and is really, really, really good. Before Spell Queller, though, we've got Sigarda's Aid. And so with Phyrexia All vs. 1 coming out, actually, the Hammer deck in Explorer might be getting... Hammer deck in Pioneer might be getting some buffs. At the moment in Explorer, there is like a vague version that exists. I'm currently thinking about putting together a video on what exists now, just so I can compare it and kind of do like a, here's what it looked like then, this is what it looks like now video. So Sigarda's Aid is really, really nice. Incredible with Hammer, obviously cast auras and equipment as though they had Flash. And obviously with Hammer, it's 1 mana, give +10/+10. Whenever equipment enters the battlefield under your control, you get around that 8 mana equip cost because you may attach a target creature you control straight away. Really, really powerful. Deck's very, very quick, hasn't quite had the tools in Pioneer Explorer before, but is obviously a huge staple of the modern format now. But with a couple of cards from Phyrexia All vs. 1, I think it might get to the stage of being a good Pioneer/Explorer deck, even if those tools specifically won't necessarily make it into the modern deck. Coming close to the end, about 5-6 cards left here, and then we have Spell Queller, the quintessential spirit of the Bant or Blue-White Spirit deck. 1 white-blue, flash, flying. When Spell Queller enters the battlefield, exile target spell will convert a mana cost 4 or less. When it leaves the battlefield, the exile card's owner may cast it without paying its mana cost, and it's 2/3 flying. It kind of slices, dices, does everything. Being able to hold it up, keep your opponent off of stuff, and then like, hey, you may end up playing it anyway. You can protect it again with Selfless Spirit, like we just talked about. And it's also like outside of the Spirits realm, where it's the main reason to play Bant Spirits as Spell Queller. Outside the Spirits realm, it even comes up as a sideboard card occasionally out of different types of control decks. So Spell Queller is like maybe the #1 card on this list if I was doing like a top 10 rankings. Super, super important. If we don't have Spell Queller, like, there's no point in the set. Slight hyperbole, but like not really. Next up, we got Thalia Heritage, a card that comes up in either like Collector Company human decks, whether that be like Bant or Green-White, and also you see a couple of copies in the Mono-White Spirit deck, especially out of the sideboard. Sorry, Mono-White Spirits. Mono-White Humans deck, don't mind me. Quite efficient, just 3 mana, 3/2 first strike. Well, the reason you actually play the card in Explorer and Pioneer is creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. You have a bunch of decks in the format trying to kind of cheat things on lands, especially looking at turn 4. If you look at things like Fires of Invention, and like, people are quite greedy and don't play that many non-basic lands. And then also the creature side of it, you just remove a bunch of blockers, especially with something like green, where they're going to go, all right, now I can finally use my mana, make some Cavaliers. Like, hey, if those Cavaliers enter tapped, you don't even need to use your Brave Elements. You just attack right past them. Thalia. And then we've got Thing in the Ice. Just a couple of cards left. 1 in a blue, 0/4 Defender. Thing in the Ice enters the battlefield with 4 ice counters on it. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, remove an ice counter from Thing in the Ice. If it has no ice counters on it, transform it. And then it transforms into a 7/8 that returns all non-horror creatures to their owner's hands. A super, super powerful blue threat. You've got a ton of cantrips to like go cast in sorceries to kind of flip it fast. It's seen a ton of play in Pioneer in Phoenix, but it's also cropped up in various different blue or blue-red shells. Generally blue-red. Obviously you're getting the red removal spells in there, and also a couple of other tools. But there's a bunch of different things you can do with Thing in the Ice, and it's a really, really powerful creature that the format has been missing. Traverse the Uvenwald. Green, and just for a lay of the land, you know, search your library for a basic card, reveal it, put it to your hand, then shuffle your library, but, oh wait, Delirium, 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard. Instead, search your library for a creature or land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Any creature card, any land card, reveal it, put it to your hand, shuffle it to your library. We've seen like different kinds of traverse shells in the past in Pioneer, using that Delirium mechanic. There are a bunch of pretty great tools for enabling it, and hey, it's a card with literally unlimited potential. As the format gets wider, as more cards are printed, tutors do just get better. But any creature, any land, I've been messing around a bunch with lands and Explorer recently, and hey, if you've got a good way to turn on Delirium, Traverse is incredible, and I'd love to have it in the format to have a play around with. Speaking of lands, we've got Westvale Abbey. What became like a powerhouse in Standard. Colorless land, 5-tap, pay a life, put a 1/1 white-black human cleric token onto the battlefield, and then 5-tap, sacrifice 5 creatures, transform Westvale Abbey, then untap it. And so these effects are quite expensive, but when you're like, I want to find some utility lands that kind of give me some value, obviously it makes 1/1s, but then this 5-tap, sacrifice 5 creatures ability often ends the game. Ormondal, Profane Prince, is a 9/7 flying, lifelink, indestructible haste demon card, and that indestructible ability there protects it from a lot of different rats, can still get farewelled away, bear it in mind, and obviously it's quite brutal to have it bounced. Be sure to play around like Field of Ruin. But hey, if you've got 5 creatures, you can sacrifice them and get yourself a game-ending demon all the time. It's just a really, really powerful effect on a land, and while 5 mana is expensive to make humans, there are a bunch of decks that kind of can flood the board really well, and so can activate the activate ability here, regardless of not whether or not you actually have time to go start paying life to make humans, which is a little slow, admittedly. While it doesn't have like an active home in Pioneer, it's a card that's always kind of there, existing, kind of looming like, hey, you could be doing this. And so I think it'd be great to get it in Explorer as well. And so that's the list. There are obviously some cards that are like nice to have. There's some cards that I'm like, we must have this. We must have Spell Queller. We must have Selfless Spirit. There will hopefully be more cards added to the format. Obviously, we're going to get some standards, some regular sets. But I'm hoping we also get another either anthology or potentially another remastered set. The last time we actually had a remastered set on Arena, it was 2020, I believe, and there were two. They did Amonkhet and Kaladesh that year. So we might, me saying, oh, hey, what if we got, you know, Return to Ravnica remastered in the fall? Wouldn't that be sweet? Isn't that much of a pipe dream, but maybe it is. That's what I'd like to see next. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you've got any ideas, like cards you want to see, cards I've left out potentially, let me know what you think in the comments. And again, please do like and subscribe. Have a great day. Pea soup.